measuring the economy. Okay. As I said before break, economists like to keep track of a handful of statistics on the economy. And we believe that these are very important for giving us a general indication of the health of the economy. One is gross domestic product, GDP. Another is unemployment. And a third is inflation. Okay. So, and we've talked about GDP, we talked about unemployment, though I want to recap unemployment before we go into inflation. Okay, so bear with me. Oops. Just a second. We're going to do a quick review of unemployment. The reason that we track the unemployment rate is that, we want an idea of the number of people willing to work who are unable to find jobs. It seems inefficient in the economy if there's someone who would like to have a job, but they can't find it, right? That is someone who could be performing work for a business. They're willing and able to do it. They just haven't been matched with the right business, in a sense. And unemployment is seen as something that's unhealthy, a problem in the economy. Okay, so we talked about how the Bureau of Labor Statistics measures unemployment, and it starts with classifying the population into three groups. The first, we have to define what the population is as far as the BLS is concerned, in terms of, for the sake of unemployment statistics. What is the population? Does anyone recall? How is this defined?
I know that
It's got two parts to it.
It's people that aren't institutionalized.
Right, uninstitutionalized.
And is there an age limit for this one?
There is an age restriction. 16 and up.
Uninstitutionalized, 16 and up.
Right.
Able-bodied.
That's it. No, nothing about able-bodied. Yeah. Everyone who's 16 and up, uninstitutionalized. So for the most part, that means not in the military and not in prison. Right? And they're 16 and up. So that's the population. Then everyone in the population gets classified into one of three groups: employed, unemployed, or out of the labor force. Okay, abbreviated OLF, out of the labor force. Okay, so everyone falls into one of these three groups. Okay, to be classified as employed, what do you need to be? What's the main thing to be classified as employed? Working. Thank you. Now, unemployed. Yeah.
It's looking for a job within the past 4 weeks.
Yeah. Looking for work.
Without work. With work without work.
and not working. Yeah. Those two things. Okay, if you're not working but you're looking for work, you're classified as unemployed. That's the real definition. Okay, and out of the labor force, those are people not working and not looking for work. Okay, yeah. So it's most important to understand the distinction between being unemployed and out of the labor force. Okay? Most of y'all as students are OLF, out of the labor force. You're not looking for jobs. You're not part of unemployment statistics. Those unemployment statistics count only the people who are not working and also actively searching for jobs. Okay, now the unemployment rate is the number of people who are unemployed over the number of people in the labor force. Okay, so the labor force, those are people who are employed or unemployed. All right, then I talked about 3 types of unemployment. Okay. Types of unemployment. Does anyone recall what one of these was? 3 types of unemployment. Not all unemployment is created the same. Yeah.
Isn't there one when you're like in between jobs?
In between jobs. Okay, and what do we call that?
Momentary?
No. Okay. So, one type of unemployment is called frictional unemployment. This is, as I would describe it, being between jobs. This is part of the matching process. But, I mean, again, this is being between jobs. That's the real idea behind frictional unemployment. And it is not a smooth transition from one job to the next. You don't just quit one job and the next day find a better one. Okay, it's not that smooth. There is some friction involved in changing jobs. You have to get fired from one job, then you start searching the ads, then you land a new job. Okay, that period when you're searching the ads, that's when you're in frictional unemployment, right? It's not a smooth transition. Or, you might have quit your job and now you're searching for a new one. You're still in frictional unemployment. The idea is that it's not a smooth transition from one job to the next. What's the opposite of smooth? Friction, right? That's why it's called frictional unemployment. And again, as I wrote here, this is just part of the matching process. This is somewhat natural in the economy. Okay, another type of unemployment is nope. Cyclical unemployment. Okay. Cyclical unemployment is due to short-term economic disruption. Okay. And, I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say one thing that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks is the major airlines are going to lay off some of their flight attendants and pilots. Okay, some of their staff. Why? Because of disruption to air travel caused by the war in Iran. So whoever said, like, one of the causes of, or like one of the results of the war will be, one of the things that the war causes is the disruption in the airline industry. In as much as that is true, I would classify it as cyclical unemployment. There's been a shock to the industry right now. That industry is going to do poorly for a while, but we expect it's going to recover. Okay, it's just part of, you know, these cycles. Things get worse, things get better. Things get worse, things get better. Or, you know, another example of cyclical employment would be in all kinds of manufacturing, but especially automobile manufacturing. When the economy is booming, people want to rush out and buy a new car. Okay, but when things aren't going so great, you don't buy as many new cars, right? You try to get more mileage out of your old junker, or you buy a used car. So, you know, when the economy is doing well, Ford Motor Company needs to hire a bunch of workers. Okay, but once the economy cools down and people aren't spending as freely, then Ford doesn't need as many people manufacturing cars, so it lays them off. Okay, those people join, like, or well, become part of cyclical unemployment. Presumably, when the economy gets better, Ford will recall them and they'll have jobs again. So yeah, cyclical unemployment. And the third type of unemployment is called structural unemployment. And there is some reason why why some workers are unemployable due to policies in the labor market. Okay. You know, imagine you were born as a less skilled worker. Okay? The most that you can produce in an hour is $4 worth of stuff for any employer. Now, given that you can produce a little stuff, but not very much, you could try, you know, applying for a job, and someone might be willing to pay you, you know, $3 an hour, and you're producing $4. Maybe that's agreeable. But then the government comes along and the government passes a minimum wage law saying that it is illegal to pay a worker less than $7.25 an hour. Well, if all you produce is $4 an hour, no one is going to hire you and pay you $7.25. You're unemployable with the minimum wage. Does that make sense? Right? You don't produce enough for any employer to justify hiring you. So you would be long-term out of a job due to that minimum wage law. In the absence of the minimum wage law, again, someone would hire you to do some small job, you know, and pay you a little bit. But again, if the law says that's not permitted, then you become unemployed. Other examples of structural unemployment might be when an industry becomes obsolete. People who had trained with skills for that industry no longer have jobs. Okay, another example of structural unemployment might be if a particular type of worker is discriminated against, you know, based on skin color or gender, they are unemployable. Then they can become part of this structural unemployment. Some labor economists will blame actually unemployment laws or unemployment benefits for creating structural unemployment. Because again, like, think of the government's policy of paying people to be, like paying people when they are unemployed. Again, unemployment benefits, the way that those work are after you lose your job, typically you are paid a percent of what you had been earning for a handful of weeks. I think in North Carolina, for example, the way that unemployment benefits work, you get paid 50% of what you had been earning earlier for up to 26 weeks, half a year. Well, do you get there is a little bit of an incentive to remain unemployed for as long as you're getting those benefits, right? Half as much income, but you don't have to work. You still have to apply for jobs, but you understand there is some incentive to linger in unemployment, right? So that would be an example of policies that cause people to become unemployed. Now, that concern about unemployment benefits creating structural unemployment is more of a concern for European countries, okay? As I said, in the US, 6 months, or in North Carolina, I think 6 months is the most time you can get unemployment benefits, okay? In Germany, I think you can get them for up to 5 years, okay? It's like a much stronger incentive to remain unemployed. But the labor economists refer to those people as part of structural unemployment. There's something in the structure of the economy that prevents these people from having jobs. Okay, now, moving on. Next topic under unemployment was the problems with interpretation. Okay, problems with interpretation. I mean, to a rough approximation, the unemployment rate tells us the fraction of the labor force that can't find jobs. But it's not perfect. And so I think I mentioned some of the drawbacks or limitations before break. Does anyone recall any of these? Okay. One is the problem of discouraged workers. Okay, discouraged workers. When the labor market, discouraged workers. When the labor market is especially poor, so imagine, you're out of a job. You've been searching and searching, but this economy just sucks. You've been sending out applications and you don't get any callbacks, okay? Well, the rational thing for you to do at that point is people stop searching. What's the point of searching for a job if nobody's hiring? Yeah? Well, if you stop searching, then you become reclassified as OLF. Remember, as far as the Bureau of Labor Statistics is concerned, in order to be classified as unemployed, you need to be actively searching for a job. So if you just give up on search, then you get classified as OLF. And so when you're classified as OLF, the unemployment rate falls. Okay. The unemployment rate falls as a result of the labor market being especially bad. Okay. You You get that? Okay, so when the labor market is really bad, people can just give up on searching, and it looks like unemployment is very low. But that might not be true. Okay, now labor economists would say this might, like you can maybe apply this to certain groups of people, like certain groups of people might opt out of the labor market just like based on their age and skills and abilities. They might just stop working, and so it looks like, or stop searching for a job. So it looks like they have low unemployment. That group of people has low unemployment, but it might be a result of just not searching. Okay, so unemployment rate falls. Okay, let me say the moral of this story is that the measured unemployment may understate the workers who cannot find jobs. Okay. The measured unemployment rate is lower than the real unemployment rate. Okay. Did I talk about that before break? This is new? Okay. Did I talk about discouraged workers at all? Not ringing any bells. Okay. Now, second problem with interpretation is, let's call it underemployment. Okay. Underemployment. Workers might accept a job with fewer hours than desired, or not using their skills, not utilizing the worker's skills. Yeah. So imagine I get laid off from my job as a college professor, okay? And I apply for other jobs, I'm looking for other work, but I can't find any other job as a college professor. So I take a part-time job delivering, food for DoorDash. Okay, I might say I am underemployed. First of all, I would like to be working full-time, but I can only find part-time employment. Okay. Second, I feel that I trained in how to be an economist, and I have all these mad skills at analyzing economic events, and yet I'm not using any of them in my job driving for DoorDash. I would argue, again, that I'm underemployed. My skills are not being employed, and my time is not being employed fully. This is not taken into account by the official employment statistics. As far as the Bureau of Labor Statistics is concerned, I am employed. If I work at all in any type of job, whether I work the hours I want, whether whether it's matched my skills, that's all irrelevant. If I have any employment, I'm classified as employed. So I might be unable to find a job suitable, right? Again, there's a moral to this story. The measured unemployment understates the workers' who cannot find, let's say, suitable employment. This is something that the Bureau of Labor Statistics doesn't really want to get involved in determining, like, are you really suited for this job? Are you underemployed? But certainly the workers may feel that they are underemployed. And they may even be searching for a permanent job, right? Actively searching for a permanent job. But as far as the BLS is concerned, they're employed. They're not unemployed. Okay, so probably there are these two important concerns about the interpretation of the unemployment rate, and both of them have the same implication, that there are always going to be more people searching for jobs, like more people who couldn't find jobs than the official employment numbers state. Okay, questions? Okay, so now we're going to come to prices. Okay. Economists measure prices because price levels change over time. Average prices tend to change over time. Okay. And which direction do prices tend to go over time? If someone tells you what, a widget cost in 1950, do you think it was more expensive or less expensive? Less expensive? Okay, yeah. Prices tend to go up over time, right? The reasons that they change are, I would say there are primarily two reasons. One is the government creates new money out of thin air, right? Well, if the government creates new money, we understand how that's going to add to inflation. Does the government ever destroy money that it previously created? Very rarely, okay? It would be expensive and it would not benefit the government at all. So no, governments typically don't destroy money after they've created it. So that's why prices tend to go up over time. More money gets created, old money doesn't disappear. The second thing is that velocity. How long until money is spent? Okay, so it's not super important to know what velocity is right now, but a second thing that contributes to inflation is how frequently money gets spent. I mean, $1 does not contribute much to the economy if you pay that dollar to me and I just stick it in my pocket and don't spend it. However, if you give me $1 and I immediately spend it, at the gas station on my way home to buy a candy bar, well, then it's created like another dollar that goes into someone else's pocket, right? That person at the convenience store, they now have $1, and they blow that dollar on something else. And like that dollar keeps getting spent and spent and spent, okay? Well, if the dollar keeps showing up often in the economy, then it's just like having multiple dollars. Like if the dollar gets spent 3 different times, that's the same thing as 3 single dollars that get spent once. The idea of velocity is funny, but again, like just how long it takes a person until they spend the money is a second factor that causes prices to change over time. If we pocket the money, then there tends to be low inflation. If we spend money quickly, inflation tends to be high, and that's called velocity. Okay. But again, average prices tend to change over time, and this causes confusion. So let me tell you a fact that I looked up recently. Philadelphia, 1793. A loaf of bread cost 9 cents.
That's a lot of money for back then.
That's a lot of money for back then. Okay, Ian has already come to a conclusion. Ian, how did you do that?
I'm thinking about, what a nickel could do 60 years ago.
What could a nickel do 60 years ago? I don't
Man.
remember, but
My dad would
Oh,
tell
your-
me,
your dad.
you can get a lot of stuff for a nickel, man.
you could get a lot of stuff for a nickel.
Couple different pieces of candy.
I remember this episode of The Simpsons where
Maybe-
Grandpa Simpson is talking about back in the day
Maybe a
and what a
movie ticket.
nickel could buy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of different, nickels had a lot of value.
Okay, well, fine. So this, of course, nickels didn't exist in 1793. We were all copper, silver, and gold back then. But okay, 9 cents for a loaf of bread. Like, what is that in modern value? Okay, Ian has a sense that a nickel used to buy a lot of stuff, which is true. But like, what is that the equivalent of? And there are different ways we can approach this problem. Okay, let me offer you one that I like to use for historical data. I like to think in terms of a day's wages. Okay, so I like to think that a day's wage for an average worker in Philadelphia in 1793 was about $1. Okay, $1 a day. So let's try to kind of scale things up by daily wages. Okay, I mean, you can see, like there are different ways that you can think about this, right? Basically, a loaf of bread costs 9% of a day's wages. Does that make sense? Okay. So if we think about today, in 2026, what is a daily wage? Average daily wage for a typical worker would be,
Hours a day, and then let's do like, I don't know, $12 an hour. 96, 100, call it $100 a day.
you want to call it $100 a day? Okay, fine. It's a little bit lower, maybe. Let's do $80 a day, just so I don't have the same numbers duplicated in this. Okay, I mean, $80 to $100 is a day's wage now. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so if we think about what is 9% of a day's wage. Okay, well, $7.20, right? $7.20. So, in other words, like, in 1793, like the amount, or let's say, the amount of time that would take to earn a loaf of bread is equivalent to $7.20 a day. However long it would take you to earn $7.20, that's how long it would have taken you to earn a loaf of bread in 1793. Okay, this is kind of using a person's time as a constant factor, right? Just treating time as the constant. Does that make sense? Now, if you look at this, $7.20 for a loaf of bread, does that strike you as high or low? Pretty high? Okay, I think that's probably about twice as high as a loaf of bread at the grocery store right now. I think, $3.50 for a loaf of bread at the store. So that's about twice what I pay for a loaf of bread at the store. In other words, in 1793, people had to work twice as long to earn a loaf of bread as they do today. Okay? So I would say bread was twice as expensive back then because you had to work twice as long to earn a loaf. Is that sensible enough? I mean, it's one way of doing things, right? It's not perfect, but that's the idea behind using a particular good as a benchmark for prices. It's kind of the logic behind a price index. You pick something to be your standard, and you see how much it would cost in the old money and how much it would cost in the new money. So the way that we measure inflation is using a price index. Okay. And I say there are really 3 steps to calculating a price index. There are different indexes that we use and different logic that we use, different goods that we use, but they all kind of follow the same logic. They all do follow exactly the same logic. First, we define a bundle of goods. Okay, a fixed bundle of goods that we're going to use as our standard. Okay, in that last example, the thing that I fixed as a standard was 1 day's work, 1 day's labor, if you want to get an idea of what I was doing there. That is not what we typically do, however. Okay, second, we calculate the cost of the bundle in current dollars or in current prices. Okay, and we calculate the cost of that same bundle in past prices. Okay. The ratio times 100 is called the price index. Okay. Got it? Okay. So here is the basic logic. And I usually like to take a break in the middle of class. You all know that. I think this is a pretty good time to take about a 5-minute break. So I'll put this on hold, and then after the break, we'll do another example. Or we'll continue, and then we'll do an example. Okay, let's go again. So I've prepared an example of calculating a price index. Okay, let's imagine that the government has decided that the price index, let's take it a step back. The government has decided that the bundle that they are going to use is 10 apples plus 5 bananas. Okay, let me give you all a little bit of the backstory, or little extra information, real information. The government agency responsible for measuring inflation in the U.S. is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, same folks who do unemployment. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics has figured out a bundle that the average American household purchases. They use that to form what they call the Consumer Price Index. But basically, they've done a bunch of analysis to figure out what is in the average American family's shopping cart each year. Does that make sense? And so that's what's basically used in the consumer price index. Let's suppose that it were as simple as they have figured out that the average American household consumes 10 apples and 5 bananas a year. Okay? And so the way we calculate inflation from one year to another is by measuring prices and pricing out this entire bundle. Okay, so let's suppose that in 2025, price of an apple was $2, and that increased to $4.26. Okay, now, you could say there was or you could say that the price of apples doubled, or it increased by 100%. That would be absolutely correct. That would, in fact, be a very simple measure of inflation, like just using apples as your one good in the bundle. But we have more goods. Okay, bananas. Let's suppose that bananas cost $1 a piece in 2025, and they cost $1.50 in 2026. In other words, there's been 50% inflation in prices of bananas. So when the BLS calculates its inflation measure based on a price index, it's essentially giving us an average inflation rate. Does that kind of make sense? You can see here one good, the price went up by 100%. The other good, the price went up by 50%. So we kind of want an average price increase. Okay. But it's not exactly an average because we want to take into account that people buy more apples than bananas. Yeah? Typical household buys more apples than bananas, so apples should get more weight in the average than bananas do. On top of that, apples are more expensive, so they're a larger share of the budget, so they get more weight due to that. So we are kind of calculating an average inflation rate, but it's not exactly what you'd expect for an average. Okay, now, as I said, the way that we calculate the price index is we price out the cost of this bundle in each year's prices. So 10 apples at $4 plus 5 bananas at $1.50, that amounts to $47.50. Okay. We also price out this same bundle in the past prices. So 10 apples at $2 a piece plus 5 bananas at $1 a piece comes out to $25. Okay? So this household spent $25 to buy its bundle of goods in 2025, and it spent $47.50 to buy the same goods in 26. Okay, that's kind of where the price index comes from, right? It's pricing out the total cost of buying this bundle of goods in each year's prices. And then in the third step, as I said, we calculate the ratio. And the ratio is 47.5 over 20 times 100. Okay, so that's 1.9 times 100 equals 190. Okay, and that number is the price index. Okay, you interpret it relative to 100 means the same prices. So this, again, this number, this is the price index. Okay. That's what we're going for. Okay. If we want to talk about inflation, the inflation rate is the index minus 100. Okay, that's always true. So in this case, 190 minus 100 equals 90% inflation. Okay, from 2025 to 2026, we would describe this as 90% inflation as measured by our price index. Okay, one good went up by 100%, another good went up by 50%, and when we weight them appropriately, the weighted average is 90% inflation. Okay, how exactly do we do that appropriate weighting? I've showed you, like right here. You price out the bundle of the good. You price out the cost of the good in each year's prices. The ratio is the price index. Okay, so this is one way that we can use the price index. We can calculate the inflation rate from it. The inflation rate between those periods is just the index minus 100. We can also adjust prices, or like any price or any monetary value to get the equivalent. Okay, suppose I earned $50,000 in 2025. How much would I need to earn in 2026 to purchase the same goods or to afford the same goods? Okay, if we want to do that conversion, then we take the price in 2025 and we multiply it by the price index over 100, and we get the answer. Okay, so like my salary, 50,000 times 190 over 100. So 50,000 times 1.9, which is, I think, 95,000. Okay. In other words, I've shown for you all, or I've calculated for you all, that I would need $95,000 today to afford the same goods that $50,000 bought a year ago. Okay, that is exactly true here. Okay, are you clear on that? Okay, so these are the two ways that we can use price indexes. One is like to come up with an inflation rate, and another is to say like how much more do we need. Okay, I mentioned that in the US, one of the common inflation measures is the Consumer Price Index. As a matter of fact, I should probably mention three common price indexes. Okay, the first of these is the Consumer Price Index. Okay, the Consumer Price Index uses a bundle of goods consumed by the average urban American household. consumer price index is based on the things that households buy. Eggs, gasoline, heat, telephones, houses, cars, fuel. Okay, and the consumer price index, again, is trying to capture like inflation as a consumer experiences it, as a typical household experiences it. A second common price index is called the producer price index. Okay, and this consists of a bundle of goods used as inputs in manufacturing. If you're Ford Motor Company and you're trying to think of like what inflation has done to your costs, the consumer price index is not well suited to you because it builds in increases in the cost of eggs and housing and other things that Ford Motor Company doesn't spend money on. What does the Ford Motor Company spend money on? Probably spends a lot of money on steel, plastics, energy, right? Those types of things are part of the bundle for the producer price index. Right? Producer price index is trying to capture inflation as a business would see it. And I'm sure you all can imagine there's no reason that these two measures need to be the same. Like prices of what households buy could be going up, but what businesses are using in production might be going down. Like they could be going in different directions. And a third common price index is called the GDP deflator. Deflator. Okay. In this, the bundle of goods is what the U.S. economy produces. Okay. So, that is restricting our attention to just what gets produced in the U.S. And these are all different measures. Like they include some various things. Like the GDP deflator obviously does not include the prices of things that we import to the U.S. So if the U.S. Imports a lot of oil, then an increase in the price of oil will probably show up in the consumer price index as inflation and show up in the producer price index as inflation, but have a smaller impact on the GDP deflator because oil just isn't what we produce in the U.S. Now at the same time, if there's something we produce in the U.S. and we don't consume it, what do we produce but export? Can't imagine, like I can't think of an example of what we produce, but it's entirely for export. But if there were such a thing, any changes in the price of that thing we produce but we export, okay, like widgets, let's call them widgets. Here in the US, we produce widgets, we don't eat them ourselves, we just sell them to other countries where people like to eat them. Okay, but if the price of widgets goes up overnight, that's going to cause inflation that shows up in the GDP deflator because the U.S. produces widgets. However, it doesn't impact American households, so it's not counted as part of the consumer price index. Okay, again, we have various ways of calculating inflation. There are pros and cons to each. The popular one is the consumer price index. If you just hear the newspapers report on inflation in the US, they're talking about the consumer price index. The Consumer Price Index is also used by the government in things like Social Security benefits. Social Security benefits in the US are automatically indexed to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. So, like in that past example where I asked the question, if I earned $50,000 last year, how much would I need to earn this year to be able to afford the same goods? And we worked out math, I'd need to be paid $95,000, okay? That is exactly what the Social Security Administration automatically does each year with Social Security checks, okay? So they calculate like how much more money you would need to purchase exactly the same goods as last year, but at this year's prices, using the Consumer Price Index. Does that make sense? Now, economists will complain that there are often three problems with price indexes. Okay, so, three limitations of price indexes. In other words, they're not that great. They're not perfect. The first concern is called substitution bias. Okay. As one good becomes expensive, rational consumers switch to less expensive alternatives. Okay, so like imagine an example where there are just two goods. Let's call them Coke and Pepsi. Those are the only two goods produced in the economy. And in 2025, a Coke and a Pepsi both cost the same, $1. Okay. And then in 2026, the price of a Coke went up to $20, while the price of a Pepsi stayed the same. Okay. Now, if we are economists and we're calculating average inflation, it might be the case that the BLS figured out that American consumers in 2025 are spending as much money, or we're buying equal numbers of Cokes and Pepsis. And then prices changed, and we price out what it would cost to buy the same goods in 2026. Okay, we would find that buying the same goods costs a whole lot more because the price of a Coke has gone up 20 times, right? But if these people are rational, what do when the price of Coke goes up 20 times? Switch to the substitute, yeah? They switch to purchasing Pepsi. So, could it be the case that a person is actually doing just as well in 26 as they were doing in 25, like, without any extra money? They're just as happy in 26 as they were in 25? Like for me, I recognize that Coke and Pepsi have different flavors, but I don't have a strong preference between the two of them. So I would just buy whichever is cheaper. Yeah? If Coke becomes a lot more expensive, I just buy Pepsi. No big deal. So I could be earning $50,000 in 25. I could be just as 26 because I have switched to just drinking Pepsi, and I've cut out all the Coke in my diet. Okay? That's entirely possible, right? Or cut out all the Coke in my bundle that I purchase, to be more exact. Okay, so we do not need to purchase the same items in order to maintain the same happiness, maintain the same standard of living. Right? We don't need to do that. We don't need to be able to afford the same bundle. So, again, we do not need to afford the same bundle. That's actually more than enough. Like, that's actually excess compensation for inflation, as an economist would think of it, right? If the government is giving us money to offset inflation, then if they calculate the price index and give us enough money so that we can afford the same goods, that would actually allow us a higher standard of living. Because, again, if you gave me enough money that I could afford all these expensive Cokes now, I'm still not going to buy Cokes. Since Pepsi's so much cheaper, I'm just going to go with Pepsi. So all that extra money that I was given to offset the cost of inflation, right? If the government gave me a pay raise, or my employer gave me a pay raise to offset the increasing cost of Coke, I don't actually need that to maintain the same standard of living, because I could have substituted for Pepsi, and so that extra money just goes to making me happier. The moral of this story is that inflation overstates the money needed for the same standard of living. Okay? Due to substitution bias, measured inflation will overstate how much money you actually need to maintain the same standard of living. So this is actually interesting because, as I said, Social Security benefits are automatically indexed or automatically linked to the CPI. And economists recognize that we are giving people enough money so they can always buy what they purchased the previous year. But because of substitution bias, they will actually be better off with the extra money. Okay, so it's more than compensating them for the burden of inflation. Okay, now, second concern with inflation is quality. Okay. The quality of the goods changes over time. So, in 1980, my parents purchased a television for our household for $150. Okay. In 2020, I purchased a TV for my house for $900. Okay. What do you make of that? Are TVs 6 times more expensive today than they were in 1980. Is that fair? Let me say, that is more or less what the Bureau of Labor Statistics makes of this fact. TVs today cost 6 times as much as they did in 1980. Okay, got it? Now, I would say, no, that's not true. The type of TV that we had in 1980, it was 13 inches. I think that's about that big, black and white, and really grainy. Okay? That TV that I bought in 2020 is probably like a 50 or 60 inch 4K type thing, right? Totally different. Now, how much would my 4K TV cost? How much would that have cost in 1980? You couldn't even buy it, right? It didn't exist. It was literally priceless in 1980, right? TV technology has changed a whole lot. So these are not the same TVs by any means. And if it cost $150 in 1980, I bet that same TV would cost less today than $150. Despite inflation, just given that it's electronics and prices of electronics tend to come down, I guess that you could buy that same 13-inch black and white TV for under $150 today, if it were manufactured. Okay, but again, like the goods are not the same. If quality tends to increase over time, then the standard of living also increases. When the Bureau of Labor Statistics first started tracking prices about 100 years ago during the Depression, I think they had in mind that the economy would be relatively stable, and that has not been true. In fact, like new technologies are what we always spend money on. And that kind of leads into the third thing, like how to incorporate new goods into the price index. And so when the CPI was designed 100 years ago, there was no such thing as a cell phone. Okay? And yet today, cell phones and cell phone services are a substantial portion of most consumers' budgets, right? You spend, you spend hundreds per year on cell phones and cell phone service, right? On average, probably. Okay, again, that was not initially part of the plan. So there's always a problem with incorporating new goods into the CPI. And the bundle of goods that households have been purchasing has shifted over time. New goods shift in the bundle. Okay, these things are hard to take into account. Got it? Okay. Even quality. Quality, going back a little bit, some of the things that are measured, or many of the things that are measured in the CPI, are very bland grocery store ingredients, like a pound of ground beef, a pound of grapes, a pound of bananas. Okay, a lot of those things go into measuring inflation. And yet, I would point out that almost all foods have improved in quality, or at least in principle, they've improved in quality over my lifetime, the past 50 years. One thing that might surprise you all is when I was a kid, nearly all fruits had seeds in them, right? Now, yeah, now think about seedless fruits, right? Okay, oranges, seedless oranges, aren't they nice? Seedless grapes, aren't they nice? Or just grapes in general. Do you realize how many more varieties of grapes there are than there used to be? There used to be like 2 types of grapes you could get at the grocery store, green or purple. Um, and now you can go to the grocery store and find a dozen different types of grapes. Or apples, right? I grew up with Red Delicious, Golden Delicious, or Granny Smith. Now you go to the grocery store and there are a dozen varieties of apples. Okay, it's a different ballpark. So we have these problems with quality changing and new goods. Okay, at least, I call them like new varieties. Some of the varieties might be old, but are just recently coming to market. But in fact, many of them are newly developed. Okay, so these are problems for measuring, these create problems for measuring inflation. Okay, got it? Okay, so for a couple of reasons, the measured inflation probably overstates how much extra money we need to maintain the same standard of living. Okay, I mean, in a sense, like measures of inflation are assuming that we are still using the same quality of internet service year after year, same quality of phone service year after year, and those are not true in the modern world. Okay, we do see substantial changes in technology, so it's not quite fair to compare the cost of a telephone in 2026 to the cost of a telephone in 1990. And yet the BLS does exactly that. Okay. Any questions about this? I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to tell you all about inflation today. The answer might be no.